Welcome back, everyone, to Getting In, a College Coach conversation. We are talking about Common App updates, and my colleague, who I think of as our resident Common App expert, Elyse Krantz, and she's also a former admissions officer at both Barnard and Bennington. Hi, Elyse.
Hi, Beth.
Thanks so much for joining today. So, we're talking about Common App updates, and you have these courtesy of, was it a webinar that the Common App recently just did? What's the
Yes.
source?
So the Common App during the summer, they release in some information about what's coming down the pipeline so that mostly school counselors, it's not necessarily intended for students or parents, but anyone is welcome to log into these. And they provided an hour webinar where they walked through changes to the application, what's changing, what's staying the same, and just some big picture things to think about down the road that we might be seeing.
Awesome. So, well, why don't we start with what's changing? And before we dig into it, the thing, of course, that's interesting is if you are new to applying to college, right? So, if you have a child who is a rising senior or you are a rising senior and you don't have older siblings, this nothing new for you. It's all just what is the Common App. But for anyone who has experience with the Common App, there have been some changes. What are those?
So the first big one that always gets announced is that there are new members this year. So
Yes.
we at College Coach, Bright Horizons College Coach, we love the Common App, I feel like, because it
Yes.
is from almost any college you apply to, most of them will accept this platform. And they just expanded its members this year. So we are thrilled, for example, that UT Austin will be on the list, Texas A&M, Western Washington University, Florida International. A lot of public universities are jumping on this Common App bandwagon, just making it that much easier for students to be able to apply. So that's one nice change, is that more students can use this applying to more of the colleges that they're interested in.
Yeah, it always makes us happy when some of the, especially some of the more popular schools, and in this case, I think UT Austin, Texas A&M in particular, come to mind, where instead of having to navigate a whole different platform, at the very least, they can fill out the Common App, and it makes it easier for counselors like us, and I think it also makes it easier for students. But perhaps we are projecting, but I
And
think it
there
does.
are a number of public universities in Washington that just signed on this year, but not
Mhm.
yet the flagship University of Washington Seattle campus. But there are hints that it might be coming or being announced later this year, like
Mm.
around August 1st, or if not this year, then next year for sure. They're hoping, I'm like crossing my fingers, you can't see it, but they're hoping it's going to happen, because that's one of the big holdouts right now of universities that are not accepting the
Yeah,
Common App.
and as I understand it, it's more of a budget thing than anything, although that might be rumor and hearsay. But you are right that certainly there is always a lot in the Facebook groups that I'm a part of. There's always a lot of agonizing when the University of Washington, once again, does not uh, accept the Common App. But I guess we'll see. I'm gonna cross my fingers and my toes that there is an announcement in August, Elise.
Me too. Me
Okay.
too. Always.
So what
Um,
else is new?
so there weren't a lot of radical shifts to the application itself. A few years ago, they underwent a very big overhaul, a new image, a new look, new color scheme. It's beautiful. So nothing like that this year, but they did make, they're very mindful of trying to make this process as easy for students as possible, especially students that may have some barrier in their life that applying to college just is more difficult. And one of those barriers they found was the fee waiver process. So for those who are not familiar, when you apply to colleges with the Common App, you pay an application fee for each application that gets submitted through the Common App. Some colleges don't charge any. That's wonderful. Some colleges charge upwards of $100 or more.
Mhm.
Um, Typical, I would say, is probably more in that 40, 50, $60 range, but it really does vary and it can add up. So in the past, students for whom paying that application fee had a financial struggle with that, they were allowed to check a box to say, I qualify for a fee waiver and here's why. And then they would have to read through this list, options, whether it's family income or that they had a fee waiver for the SAT, something like that. And then their school counselor would have to verify all of this information. It was a
Wow.
bit of a process.
Yeah.
Now it is so simple. It's wonderful. Any student that feels that applying to college financially, that application fee presents a financial burden, just has to check yes. And then their school counselor gets prompted, and they would say, yes, to the best of my knowledge, this student does need a fee waiver. They check yes,
Right.
and you're good, and you won't have to pay those application fees for college.
That is amazing. And I think the point you made is a good one, which is just they're trying to eliminate barriers, and that is a big one if you have to jump through all of those hoops. I like that there's a little bit of a check and balance there, right? That there's someone who's saying, yes, I believe this is the case, that this person, it would be a hardship. Because I know, again, from the counselor groups that I'm part of, that that is a massive frustration for them, where they've got a student, they know the student can't pay. For whatever reason, they're struggling to provide the proof that is acceptable, and it's just one more thing on a school counselor's plate, and they have a lot on their plates. And it would be great if they could just focus on what they want to do, which is helping the students. And checking a box themselves sounds like it makes things a lot easier. So bravo to the Common App for that change this
And
year.
the reason that these changes happen is because of feedback that they get from students and parents and school
Yes.
counselors. They ask for this feedback every year, and they really do their best to try and implement what they can to make this process a little bit more seamless.
Yes. Love that. So there's one other big change, right? With regard to recommendation letters.
Right. So this doesn't impact students so much, but oftentimes we run into these questions where a student, let's say, wants to ask a teacher that now
Mm-hmm.
works at a different school or that has retired and has a different email address from the one that they used to have for the
Yes.
it's it can be challenging to navigate that. It's a small population that this impacts, but for those that do, just know that behind the scenes now, recommenders can use a single email address regardless of where they're working or currently worked or I mean it's going to make it a little bit easier to ask a teacher perhaps that isn't in your life currently at the high school where you attend. So it'll just one little change that for those students it'll be a nice adaptation.
So I'm not sure I totally follow this change. So was it that you had to use the email that you had at your job for the Common App, or that you used a special email related to the school? Can you explain just a tiny bit more
Sure, I
about this?
can. I mean, I don't know how much our listeners will
I know it's a little
care.
bit inside
No, it's
baseball,
okay.
but
It's interesting because when just like students who have to create a Common App account in order to apply, teachers have to create a Common App account to serve as letters of recommendation writers.
got
So
it.
let's say they are working at Southington High School, and that's where they have their account through. And so that is where they can write letters for. But then let's say they retired and now they only have a Gmail account. But previously they couldn't use that Gmail, like they would have to create a second account because the Southington account was still active, and
Got it.
it was complicated. So now they can use the same email no matter where they were. It doesn't matter if it's the school account or the private account. It just makes it a little bit easier for those teachers and students that maybe had a teacher who moved on them in their life.
Nice. I like that.
Okay.
And thank you for the additional explanation.
Sure.
That's just interesting to hear.
Yeah.
So, what's not changing? You mentioned not that many things are changing, and there are some things that are staying the same. So, what are some highlights from your perspective of those things?
So the essay topics are staying the same, and this is great. So for everyone who's listening and is like, yes, I'm ready to start writing my essays, you can. You just have to you can either log into your Common App account if you don't have one yet. You could just create one, or you could just do an internet search for Common Application Essay Questions 2023. You'll see them all listed there. And it was interesting. They always, on the webinars, they always say which essay questions were most popular in previous years. And the new one that was introduced last year as a
Hmm.
result of COVID, which asked students to reflect on um, a person who made them thankful in a surprising way, and it was about gratitude. It was one of their least popular choices from this most recent round. The most popular essay questions are generally, they haven't changed. It's the topic of your choice.
Yep.
It's the tell us about facing adversity in your life or having personal growth. So those are the common ones, but those are not changing. So same as last year.
The gratitude one does not surprise me, because to me it falls squarely into that category of how do you write about someone else? How do you write about yourself when you're writing about someone else. And I think it's a tricky thing to do. So,
And the fact
um,
that they added in the "in a surprising way"
yes,
aspect, right? So it's not just about tell us about being grateful. Tell us about how someone has done something kind for you that's wonderful. Like maybe it wasn't surprising and therefore you felt like you couldn't write about it. So,
right, right. It's a little bit of an odd question. So
yeah.
that's interesting. What else? Activities that's staying the
That's
same?
staying the same, so you still have they did switch it up last year, so
Hmm.
that there's a little more room to elaborate on the name of your activity as well as the role you have in your activity, and then there's room for a description of what you've done in that. So that's all staying the same. And there's also they introduced, now I'm thinking it's 2 years old, probably, right?
The
The
disruptions
COVID
question.
question basically is the way they called it. But
Is
it's
it?
broad, so it's really for any student that has had been impacted by a natural disaster or a deep and long-lasting some kind of challenge. Could have been COVID, an illness, something. So 16% of students they announced used that optional question last year, and that'll still be around for students who need it.
That's an interesting stat because I've been very, very sort of against the idea of using it just because you feel like you need to answer it. I'm against that in general, right? If you don't have something specific and it's not a required thing, I feel like you just leave it. So it's interesting that only 16% of students used it. To my mind, that's appropriate because probably only 16% actually had something so significant that it warranted writing about it. But that's interesting.
And students should definitely feel comfortable leaving it blank. The
Yes,
majority of students do. It doesn't hurt you. Colleges are not looking for something extra there if it doesn't need to be there.
right, exactly. All right, we have a few more minutes. I did want to talk quickly about how you could start working on the Common App because the new Common App technically does not come out until August 1st, but that doesn't mean you have to wait until then, correct?
Correct, nor should you wait until August 1st.
Yes.
Any student, whether they are a rising senior or even an underclass student, they can create their Common App account now. When you register, you just indicate the year that you will be graduating from high school, and then you'll be able to access it. So the part that you would want to work on is the main common application. So this includes questions about your address and where you go to high school and what activities are you involved with. That's the main part. It's on the common app tab. What you don't want to touch are the school related questions, the
Yes.
college related specific questions or essays related to colleges, because when August 1st comes around, the common app has that little bit of a refresh and the rollover happens. They call it the rollover. So everything that you've entered in that main part of the application will stay, but anything that you've entered on one of the college specific supplements will be deleted. So that's why any student now can focus on the essays, the activities page, those basic questions.
Right. And I think in general, I don't think either Elise nor I would advise that you be writing those essays in the application itself anyway. So that's one thing, right? You really want to write it as a separate document and then cut and paste it into the application. But the other reason not to, in theory, I suppose you could start working in those supplemental essays for the different colleges. But here's the thing, they might change their question. And that would be terrible because that would be so much wasted time if you spent time working on a specific school's supplemental essay only to discover that in this new version they have a new question. So just don't touch those for now is
Just
my
wait.
advice.
There's plenty to do. For most students, that main personal statement takes a significant amount of time over the summer anyway. You could focus on that. And as I said, the activities page that is, I know you've discussed this on the podcast, how it does take a lot of effort to do that page well. So that's
Yes.
another great place to focus your efforts until August 1st.
Yes, totally agree. Elise, thank you so much for joining and sharing these updates with us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Always happy to.
It's killing two birds with one stone because now I know what the updates are in my work with students, and that's always a good thing. Okay, so next week, Ian is going to be here hosting. We're talking about LGBTQ plus college search, partially in honor of Pride Month, but also just because we think it's really good information to have. And we're going to be doing a listener Q&A. So don't forget, we're here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Pacific.